Welcome everyone to the Faith Development for Newer Faith Development Professionals. Here you are, and this is a webinar hosted by the Mid-America and Southern regions. Make sure this is working. There we go. So welcome everyone. We are so glad you are here with us. I am Nancy Combs Morgan, one of the congregational life consultants that serves both the Mid-America and Southern regions, and my pronouns are she, her, hers. Cameron, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself?
Hey everybody, Cameron Young, one of the newest members of Congregational Life staff. I also serve the Southern and Mid-America regions. My pronouns are they, them, theirs, and I live here in Fort Worth, Texas.
Thanks, Cameron. I forgot to mention I live in Lexington, Kentucky, and it's been a gorgeous day here today. I hope it has wherever you have been. Cameron,
it's been about 100 degrees here, Nancy.
Oh, down in Texas. I'm so glad I'm up here in Kentucky. So Cameron, if you would bring us our centering.
So first, I'm going to invite you to find a comfortable sitting position, ideally with your back straight and perhaps your feet flat on the floor. I'll also invite you to either close your eyes or soften your gaze if closing your eyes isn't a part of your practice. And just take a few moments to center in on your breath. Perhaps that's to count your breaths, or perhaps that's just to say, I know I'm breathing in, and I know I'm breathing out. And as you continue to be aware of your breath, perhaps you can set your intention towards this reading entitled Each Day from Kristen Harper, which is part of a publication called Voices from the Margins. Each day provides us with an opportunity to love again, to hurt again, to embrace joy, to experience unease, to discover the tragic. Each day provides us with the opportunity to live. This day is no different. This hour no more unique than the last, except maybe today, maybe now, among friends and fellow journeyers, maybe for the first time, maybe silently, we can share ourselves.
Thank you, Cameron. As we light our virtual chalice, let us be open to the wisdom from Parker Palmer, a Quaker writer, theologian, and activist who reminds us from the courage to teach. Good teaching cannot be reduced to technique. Good teaching comes from the identity and integrity of the teacher. And Cameron, if you would lead us in our introductions.
So you heard from Nancy and I already. So if each of you would just jump in popcorn style and introduce yourself, say your name and also your pronoun. your congregation, your role in the congregation, the size of your congregation or your program, and then perhaps if you want to share a little bit more about you and perhaps your relationship, your prior relationship with Unitarian Universalism. So whoever wants to jump in.
I'll start. My name is Amy Nelson, she, her, hers. I am from First Unitarian Universalist Church in Rochester, Minnesota. I have been acting DRE since September 1st, which was the last day of our previous DRE. The approximate size of the congregation program, we have about 380-ish members. We're still taking enrollments, but we're probably at about 70 children and youth enrolled in the program. My previous role with UU, I've been a member of this congregation for 10 years. I've been board president. I was on the search team. I've done a lot of lay leadership roles, and I'm stepping into this. So we didn't start the year without a DRE, and we'll go from there and see what happens. So I'm excited to be on this call.
Okay. I'll drop it in here. My name is Becky Ruby. I'm with the Unitarian Universalist Society of Geneva. My colleague Scott is also on this call. Let's see, I am just stepping into the DRE role effective October 1st. So it hasn't quite begun yet, but our congregation has been without leadership for our religious education program for about 2 years. I have registered about 60 kids for the program. I'm not even sure how big our congregation is. Yeah, so just looking for advice, you know, any experience that I can gain from people who have been in this role would be fantastic. Thank you.
Hi, hopefully you guys can hear me. I'm Scott. I work with Becky. I am, my pronouns are he. I am co-chair of the steer committee and a YRUU advisor. And I'm here to learn as much as I can too, because as she says, we haven't had a DRE and we're just trying to get our house in order. Thank you.
I will go next. My name is Jess, she, they, none, and I serve as the Director of Religious Exploration at the UU Church of Jacksonville. And I just started within the past couple of months. They were without a religious education leader for about 8 months. Last year I was in Orlando and doing work with them. And it's a small church. I think they have registered with UUA like 250, but I think I've only seen 100 people. I only have about 12 to 15 kids from birth to 18. So it's a growing program. And I just officially became a UU last year. One of those, I've always been a UU and didn't know it type deals.
I'll go next. I'm Sarah. I use she, her, hers pronouns. I'm the Director of Children's and Community Programming at All Souls Unitarian in Indianapolis, Indiana. I've been in that role since about the end of July. I would say that there's about 260 members in our congregation, and I think I have about 40 kids enrolled in the program right now. And they've had a little bit of turnover the past couple of years just because someone who had been there for about 5 years had left. And then the person that they hired last year was facing kind of a long commute and had the opportunity for a fully remote position, and so left after a year. So I'm just kind of looking at, you know, how to get at the community's deeper vision and help them articulate a plan for the future and start, you know, kind of coalition building in a way that's going to be sustainable no matter who's in the role. Yeah, so that's where I'm at.
I'll go. I'm Kelly Stokes, she, her, hers. I'm in Austin, Texas at the first UU of Austin, and I've been in the role of RE coordinator since about the end of May. We used to just have one DLFD, and we've changed it, and we have a team approach now, and the other person working with me, who's our RE chaplain, may be joining this at some point. And so I've been UU for only a little more than 2 years. Same as Jess, I found it and realized I had been UU all my life and didn't know it. So this is all real new for me. And our last DLFD just left quite suddenly after having been with us for less than a year. So being a parent at the church, I just jumped in to try to see what we could do. Thanks.
I'm Jessica Dunsofanoff. I'm with the UU Congregation of the South Jersey Shore. I'm the Director of Religious Education there. I've been in that role about a year now. We have about 100 members. Our program has about 20 kids registered. We get about a dozen or so on Sunday. I've been with that congregation for about 6 years as a member and a parent. And when our DRE left last year, I took the role. So I spent sort of last year doing it exactly the way she had always done it. And I'm really looking forward to this year sort of, you know, really thinking about what I'm doing and how we're doing it and sort of, you know, developing and growing from there. Thanks.
Thanks, Jess. And is that everybody?
I gotta jump in.
Oh, please.
Well, I think I'm the last one. So my name is Kim Hartman, she, her, hers. I'm at the Fox Valley Unitarian Universalist Fellowship in Appleton, Wisconsin. I feel like I'm crashing this, and I'm sorry for that, but I feel like I've been in my role I just started my 7th year, but I think that there's probably some things that I can learn from listening in tonight. So I promise I won't be obnoxious. I'm the DRE there, and our congregation is between 650 to 700, and we've got 200 plus kids in our program, in our RE programs. And I've been a Unitarian Universalist for 7 years.
Thank you so much. I want to chime in. You know, I like to go to beginners yoga classes every now and then, even though I've been doing yoga for about 5 years now, just because there's something to be said about resetting and beginner's mind. So I think the fact that you joined in is a blessing. And I also, what I didn't get a chance to add is that both Nancy and I have served extensively as religious educators in congregations before taking on work with the UUA. So what I'll say is that we've been exactly where most of you have been, being thrust into this new role and being scared and overwhelmed, because this job is not like really any other job. This vocation isn't like any other vocation. You probably don't have a lot of precedence for it in your past professional experience. And that can be a scary thing. But we're here just know that you're among friends, and we've been where you are, and we're here to walk that, exciting and sometimes nerve-wracking new journey with you.
And I just want to echo that and also share, Kim, I'm thrilled that you're on with us. I'm thrilled that everybody is joining in. And tonight we're being in an intentional, albeit for just this evening right now, a learning community, but one that Cameron and I want to make sure that you know that we are a resource to you, or a conversation or a thought partner, and really hope that you feel that sense. So let's go just a little bit deeper. So it's always important, even for a 90-minute webinar, to find out if there's one sort of really pressing question that you very much want to have attended to. We simply want to, if we can't address it, we want to make sure that you at least have some direction to go with that question. And then, as Cameron was asking about how you became involved in Unitarian Universalism, a little bit, a few of you shared a little bit when you were introducing yourself of what brought you to this particular endeavor. But if you want to say more, or if you have a pressing question, I encourage anyone to share right now, popcorn style. Anyone?
I would like to say I feel that I would really love to see a good model from a program that is working well for somebody. I have no desire to recreate the wheel. I'm confident that the wheel exists, a very good wheel exists. If I could, get my hands on that as a starting point. Obviously, I will need to make changes to fit our situation, but that's one thing that I'm hoping for. Thank you.
Thanks, Becky. It was Becky, right?
Yes, thanks.
Great. Anybody else?
So this is Amy Nelson from Rochester, Minnesota. I feel I need to chime in because I joke that this is the job I've never wanted, because I've been asked in the past to do this, because I do have a teaching background and some experience with administration in schools. So the fact that I just kind of fell into this is interesting, and I'm just pleased that it's one of those situations where I get to try it out being the acting for a while, and then I have an easy out, and our minister knows that. But I'm really enjoying it right now, and I am looking forward to hearing more of what everybody has to say about their programs, and just gleaning as much as I can off of that. So thanks for having me.
You're welcome, Amy. I'm thrilled you're here. Anybody else?
So I guess I'm realizing that I didn't really address at all what brought me to this endeavor when we did our introductions. And I've been UU since college, and I've been in fellowship models with no minister. I've been in churches with and without DREs. And I've been in, smaller and then larger churches. And more recently, a lot of my volunteering has been with more area and regional youth endeavors and youth programming. And so now I'm looking and I'm turning inward to this church community. And one of the things that I'm noticing, even as we're introducing ourselves here, is the proportion of youth to adult members that different people are describing. And I'm looking at mine, and I've been thinking, that proportion is kind of lower. And that makes me feel like it kind of makes more present to me the fact that our church wants to be in a growth state, but that growth is slow or just sort of oscillating. And when I look at my volunteers, I really see the diehards, the people who wear like 3-4 hats, so it's like board members who are also volunteering in RE and are also on 2 committees. And, I'm trying to figure out how to widen that coalition in a sustainable way. So I think that's probably the most pressing thing, is just how to make it, we talk about de-siloing RE, but how to do that de-siloing and really build sustainable intergenerational community in a way that fuels adult participation in children's programs and youth programs.
And those are the questions of this time in our movement. And there isn't one answer. I so wish that Cameron and I came with a magic wand, but the conversations we have about that and how people are experimenting to move forward with that, Sarah, that's really the heart of the matter. So thank you for sharing. Anyone else?
I've kind of, being very new, done a lot in the past year. I think I've taken 90 hours of Red Mods and worked at the Point and presented at the Mountain with Gail Forsyth Vale. And so I just kind of dove in. And part of that is because my background, I have my master's in library science. I've done a lot of leadership work, I started working on my master's in social work at one point. So it's almost like I am an amazing example of a UU, but I don't know a lot about being a UU. So I've been that's part of why I took so many Ren Mods, trying to catch up really fast. And I am respected and given lots of really awesome opportunities and have a lot that I can share, but I want to make sure that I'm truly in line with what I should be presenting.
Just the greatest gift that you can bring to this endeavor is you and everything you just described. So, so thank you so much for being a part of tonight's webinar. Anybody else? Okay, then. We're going to be talking, and folks, this is a global overview of some of the core pieces that we think are important for you to see. And so we'll be moving at a pretty steady clip, and there's always more to share. But I think it's important to name the different roles and expectations that many of us encountered at a congregational level. And I'm glad that Cameron mentioned that both of us have served, but Cameron much more recently, so that's wonderful. But we are often expected to be supervisors, whether we're supervising a RE assistant or nursery care workers, definitely a colleague. And I'm hoping that you always think of yourself as a colleague with whoever is serving in a leadership position, whether or not you have other religious professionals, but you are a colleague and a cheerleader, not in the rah-rah kind of way, but in the way that brings a sense of hope and optimism to this endeavor that we call faith development, that there's actually something in your heart that resonates with the possibilities that can be created in this endeavor. And arbiter, often we have to be that person who's listening carefully with people who have a strong sense of a particular investment or even entitlement to do with things like our RE program. And often we have to adapt in a way that is unanticipated. And it's important to be open to that adaptation. And first and foremost, whether or not we're teaching in a classroom or not, but we are here because we have a sense of vocation. As Parker Palmer mentioned, it's not the skills that you bring, it's who you are. It's your integrity, your identity that are the greatest gifts. But this role of teacher cannot, of course, be forgotten. And then creator, I'm hoping all of you all celebrate or have a sense that your creativity is really needed. And sometimes that's exasperating, that role. I think it was, who mentioned that they wanted just a template? I think, was that Becky? Who wants a template and a set and a model. And there are things like that. But at the same time, having a sense that you're creating it as you go along, but hopefully always with others, that you're not doing this individually. The most important thing, and the thing that helped me so much as a brand new DRE, close to now 23, almost 24 years ago, was to really begin to understand my own working style. It didn't happen until I began to attend other trainings, congregational leadership school, as well as Renaissance modules, that I began to really appreciate that as an extrovert and as an enthusiast, that I really needed to be mindful to work with others, whether it was the teachers that were working with me or the RE council or committee, to understand your own temperament, your own working style, as well as your strengths and weaknesses. In that enthusiasm, I never thought things like an agenda was needed. Let's just talk all this through. Let's just brainstorm. And that was quite exasperating to many of the detail-oriented, and bless them. So knowing your strengths and weaknesses and being open to being adaptive is so, so important. But folks, the number one role the absolute most paramount thing that you are to hopefully understand as a primary charge is to build relationships. But the responsibilities sometimes can feel like, oh my gosh, administering the program, understanding the content of the program, being mindful and attentive to the budget, and understanding where the line items exist and who you have to be accountable to around budgetary issues, knowing early on what the worship expectations are. Sometimes it's a real big aha moment when you discover 3 months in that, oh gosh, the whole community is assuming that you're going to totally handle X, Y, or Z when it comes around the holiday pageant or something like that, or some sort of worship expectation. So important to have people explicitly describe what those expectations might be. I mentioned special programs and holidays, volunteer management and training. And number one thing with this, folks, again, do not do it alone. Make it a group endeavor. It's everyone's charge to help absolutely link those who feel that they have a connection with other people who want to become involved with faith development. And then, of course, those people who are directly working with you, hopefully, knock on wood, who help you share the load and share all of these responsibilities, whether or not you have a committee structure or something like that. And then communication. To me, that's as important as building relationships. Really communicating in multiple fashions, whether it's through social media, your bulletin boards, your newsletter, or just absolutely sharing in any way, shape, or form something that needs to be communicated. So when I mentioned about good relationships with the people that are directly involved in leadership in the congregation around, for instance, if you have a personnel committee or if you have, of course, a board, understanding the clarity in documents. And what I mean by that is that even if you're kind of an in-between person in terms of your acting or your interim, hopefully there's some description of what is expected of you. Even if you're an active volunteer serving in that capacity, it's important to know if you're accepting a certain responsibility for a program, it's still critically important to know what people are expecting. You also, for those of you who are serving in a professional capacity, early on, do not hesitate to ask for evaluations. And what I mean by that is don't wait until the end of the year. Actually mention to whoever hired you, if there's still that search committee, or to those people serving in a personnel fashion, that you want to be evaluated in 6 months. Hopefully there's someone there to supervise you and there's clarity around that, whether or not it's the minister or someone else. But having that feedback loop is critically important. So important to have an understanding of who does what, understanding, as I mentioned, of the financial and public support from your board leadership, and the expectations around how you act with other committees. And I want to pause here for a second. I hope that you see yourself as an advocate for helping to grow human beings in your context. And the number one thing you can do to achieve what Sarah Cannon was talking about with a multi-generational focus is to look for those moments when you're talking to someone from a social justice committee or you're talking to someone from the stewardship committee, to always add in, and how can we bring a multi-generational lens to this, including things like your canvas, including things like any social justice endeavor. Not just having your social justice committee show up at your youth group and say, this is what we're expecting you to do while we go do this big recycling project, but actually having representation on those committees of children, adolescents, and youth who are active in other committees. That's a part of your advocacy of making sure, and even if it feels like drops of water on a stone, keep asking and keep advocating. And even better, have some of those teens or those adolescents asking themselves, can I take part in this board meeting? Can I come to this social justice meeting? And of course, the essential of building a good relationship is having a collegial connection to whoever is serving with you, where you all are having regular conversations. You're not just catch as catch can, running after one another and saying, this is what needs to be attended to, but you're actually having regular conversations. And this piece about being in relationship, I wish someone had said this to me again, a millennia ago as a brand new DRE, that I alone am not capable of achieving all those responsibilities I just rattled off. I truly have this earnest appeal that I thought I was going to be the person who could achieve all of this, and the weight of it became heavier and heavier. But if someone had also said to me that the number one thing that I really should be attending to is building relationship, I would have thought, and I knew that I was capable, and I know each of you are capable. You were there to help harness the energy of all those dear souls that you're in community with. You are not there to create the energy. You are there to harness the power and inspiration of who you're in relationship with. And I don't mean harness as in controlling or stifling, but to absolutely listen carefully when people get fired up about, oh, I wonder if this could be an interesting RE program or something. You are there to help empower others to participate. And please, please, please remember you're there to reflect the light. And what I mean by that is a sense of hope and joy and optimism and courage. You are not expected to be the source of all of that. And with that said, I'm going to turn this over to Cameron.
And one thing I would like to add to what Nancy was talking about in terms of building good relationships is what I think is just vital and a pitfall that many early DREs fall into is to recognize and to relentlessly educate about your own boundaries. Realizing the difference between being a servant leader versus an indentured servant, I think is going to be crucial. Knowing that the time that's allotted to you by your contract to work for the week is the time that you should work. And also knowing what your time off is, educating the congregation about your time off, educating the congregation about what is your personal time, what do you need for your friends and family, because that's ultimately what's going to sustain you in this work, is establishing your boundaries very early. And if you can recognize and establish them now, then your later, your 3 years down the line, religious educator self is going to thank you for it. And so I'm going to read off a quote that I think is sort of a mantra in religious education circles in Unitarian Universalism. This is by the sage Connie Goodbread, who is one of our leaders in congregational life staff. So it is, faith development is all we do. Unitarian Universalism is all we teach. And the congregation is the curriculum. So when we talk about curriculum, I want you to memorize these 3 phrases: explicit, implicit, and null. These are 3 types of curriculum that are going to serve you well down the line. Because when we talk about curriculum, people's minds immediately go to a program or a binder with lesson plans in it. And sometimes those binders can be terribly dated. If you have like a curriculum inventory at your church, you can find some stuff full of badly culturally misappropriated stuff in the 80s that you should burn and never use. A lot of churches have those. But that is only one type of curriculum. That is explicit curriculum. Explicit curriculum is what is either a program explicitly offered in the church, or say, for example, the Dedham Covenant that your church recites every Sunday, the affirmation, love is the doctrine of this church, the quest of truth is its sacrament. So that is written, that is set in stone, that is something you say every Sunday, and therefore that is explicit curriculum. But there are 2 types of other curricula. which are implicit and null. And that's really more of what Connie means when she says the congregation is the curriculum. So the implicit curriculum is not what is specifically said, but what is implied. It's how, so for example, the congregation, how people treat each other, what your relationships are like. That can be construed as being implicit curricula. If a child comes into the church and adults say hello to that child, the implicit curricula, the implied curricula, is that this is a welcoming place for a child to be. If they don't say hi to the child, that is null. That is null curricula. Children are not welcomed into this church. So when you're thinking about the curricula, I would challenge you not to just think about what are the programs your church is offering, but how are you relating to each other? What are the aesthetics of your building and your program say? Things like that, because that is all part of how we do faith development. So if we could go to the next slide, Nancy. At the core of those curricula are covenant and relationship. So for those of us who are invested in UU faith development, what if we understood our mission to enable children, youth, and adults to be a part of a community which seeks to manifest more hope, more love, more courage, more justice, and more joy in the world? With that charge, we would need to recognize that our work takes place in the context of interpersonal relationships. So I heard it thrown out, so this goes back to on explicit curricula. I heard it, I think I heard earlier, if there's a model of a program that is successful, then that person would love to hear. And essentially the answer is that there is no model. The best ministries are done at their core relationally. Relationships is at the core of what we do in ministry. And those relationships are maintained and developed and maintained through covenant. So because we are not a creedal church, we do not get up every Sunday and say, "This I believe," together. If we did that, honestly, community might be easier sometimes. But in my opinion, it wouldn't be authentically UU, because Unitarian Universalists have a tolerance for ambiguity, have a tolerance for different sets of beliefs. So I think because we are a covenantal church and not a creedal church, it's harder for us to be in community. And which is why the covenant piece is so vastly important. So, in teaching and journeying with our children, youth, and adults in faith development, there are fundamental needs that they have. One is to learn with their minds, hearts, and hands, and I would even say bodies. So if you're in the West, and particularly in religions with Judeo-Christian origins, there tends to be this separation from mind and body, that the body is inherently inferior. And I think we're finally starting to recover that in Western theology, that the body is very much part of what we do. It's part of our faith development. It's part of our spirituality. It's part of how we learn. Our whole lives is a perfect example of that. The OWL program, that bodies are sacred, bodies are holy. So minds, hearts, hands, and bodies. And what I would say is familiarize yourself with the different styles of learning. If you aren't already, I would read into Gardner's multiple intelligences theory, and know that people have many different styles of intelligences and many different styles in which they learn. There are no dumb people. There are just different types of intelligences. Linguistic intelligence, numbers, spatial intelligence, bodily kinesthetic intelligence, so on and so forth. So those, if you're crafting a program, I think it's essential to keep those types of intelligences in mind, to know that you're going to have children and adults with all of those different learning styles, and know that it's important to nurture and cater to each of those learning styles. So children and youth also need to engage in integrated experiences that are anchored by soul-stirring narratives. So learning is experiential as well. There's a reason we send youth on service trips or coming of age heritage trips, is because we know they don't just learn sitting in a classroom. To learn faith by doing faith. One of my favorite phrases is that faith is not taught, it's caught. So as a religious educator, we have to challenge ourselves not to center didactic teaching, but think about how we're actually transmitting our faith and not just sitting people down and teaching them. And again, that goes back to that catching the faith is done relationally, not didactically. To be empowered as knowers, practitioners, and creators of Unitarian Universalism. So churches, most adults in UU churches are coming from other faiths. So they haven't grown up in the faith. They are still actively learning how to be Unitarian Universalists. And as a leader of this faith, as somebody who has been tasked to be the religious educator of your church, you are modeling Unitarian Universalism. So that goes down to what you say, what you might say from the pulpit, what you might say relationally. When you talk about our theology, when you talk about Unitarian Universalism, people are going to take cues from you. People are going to take cues from you on how you're treating people within the church, how you're centering our principles. So just know that as somebody in the role you're now in, you are very much a role model for Unitarian Universalism. And part of that is knowing the transformative power of justice and love. So how might you embody justice and love in your church, in your congregation, and in the wider world?
Thank you so much, Cameron. Important grounding and really thinking about the overview. And I want to welcome, I believe we've had another person join us. Karina, would you like to introduce yourself?
Hi, yes. Can you hear me?
Yes, uh-huh.
Hi, so my name is Karina. I work for, I'm a youth coordinator for North Parish Church in North Andover. And I joined in today just to learn more about UUA. I know how to work with children, but I want to know more about like the UUA history, and I guess there's a lot of stuff I don't know about UUA, so I just want to learn more about it.
Sure, we are absolutely ready to share. We may not be going into great detail about UU history, but at the same time, any bit we share hopefully will be illuminating. We're thrilled that you're taking part, and thank you for your service to the youth in your congregation. So when you look at the overview of the entirety of your program, whether or not you're serving specifically just with youth or you're actually a lifespan faith development professional or volunteer, there does need to be awareness of the content. So Cameron and I have been really emphasizing the critical importance at building multi-generational relationships, at making sure you're a clear advocate in your program for making deep relationships across the boards in your congregation. But you still have to have a handle on what is the content, or what are the messages, or what are the themes that you want to make sure that people of all ages are having an opportunity to encounter. So you are the person to hopefully work with a handful of others to help this content. We're going to be reviewing tonight at a balcony view, a kind of quick global view, some of the great sources. And I want to assure, we've gone back and forth, and I actually tried to think who exactly, if it was Becky who said you want a model. There are things like curriculum maps for the use of Tapestry of Faith, and a lot of that is out there. So there are sort of guideposts, but the basic thing you're doing is helping people to create something together. Hopefully in this overview, there is some embodiment. We've already been really emphasizing the experiential and the hands-on service. If you are simply directing children and youth and adults to sit in chairs and to talk at one another for 45 minutes or an hour, you're missing the opportunity of looking up and outward and connecting with your community, with the natural world, with the community-based partnership organizations who are hopefully having you show up to say, we want to be a community-based partner, so that hands-on service. And I would encourage you to be that leader in your congregation that says, let's build a partnership over time. Let's not just do a one-off. I get concerned about those programs, those directors who are actually saying, well, this year it's going to be the Heifer Project, next year it's going to be this, next year it's going to be that. That's well and good, but think about especially those partnership organizations close by, so that you and your congregation are a part of that community. Have that conversation with your youth and young people. What are the things that you know that are a serious issue that should be attended to in our town, in our community, and whether that's hunger, whether that's ecological justice, whatever that is, and then help them do some research where you then have an opportunity to do this hands-on service. Multi-generational ministry, folks, if we don't figure this out, we're not going to be around in 10 years. I've actually been saying that for 10. So I know we're at that 10-year mark, but even another 10, we're not going to be we're not going to be around if we do not help people have multi-generational relationships. And also social events. It's so important to have fun, to find ways to move and to sing together and to cook together and to all those good things. It's so important. So I'm just interested for a moment, and I realize time is always a precious resource, but would a few of you be willing to share what you understand to be the model of faith development in your congregation? And this isn't a test. I'm just kind of wondering sort of how you understand it. Anyone? And you can just jump in. If not, we will move on. But I wonder how you would describe.
This is Amy from Rochester. I was just gonna say, we're kind of in a little bit of a transition right now from religious education, as it has been kind of known for years and years, to more of that faith development, and really promoting the fact that we're developing tomorrow's leaders and future UUs, and we've been in this transition for a while, and now I feel like we're finally maybe getting a little bit of traction as I'm looking at our youth program coordinator. Maybe we've made some good changes this year to the way things are working inviting our 7th through 12th graders to the services now. So their religious education is between services because we have 2 services during the church year. So things like that where we're integrating them more into our everyday instead of RE being completely separate.
Thanks, Amy. And we are serving at a time which is an in-between time. For decades, Unitarian Universalist congregations understood that a person in faith development was creating a church school with separate age cohort classes, with measurable content, that we were to cover a study of the world's religions, social justice, UU identity, and absolutely an immersion into Jewish and Christian history, which is also our history. There was that core content, and we're moving away from, let's not just aim for measurable content and organizing as a class or another school for young people who have school all week. You know, families have been voting with their non-participation because that's not what they're looking for, and we'll talk about that briefly. Anyone else want to share a little bit about the model in your congregation?
I'll talk. This is Jess from Jacksonville. We're kind of also in a unique position of transition, and I think part of why I was brought in was because I am very passionate about the change in the culture that's coming, and was a proponent of it in other areas, and so it's kind of melded me well into the new world that I'm in. And so there's quite a few of the parents that are very active, and they're kind of riding this wave and pushing for a change for family ministry in the whole congregation, because they're also with an interim minister, so like everything is interim, and so they're kind of really rebuilding everything, and it's enjoyable to see that they're rebuilding on that family community aspect, instead of the sit and learn aspect.
Neat. Thank you so much, Jess. So we're needing to move just a little bit at a more steady clip. And guess what? There's more opportunities that we can connect together. Cameron and I will be doing a webinar specifically on the new UUA's youth safety guidelines. We're going to be touching on that tonight. We'll also be doing a webinar in October for those of you who are serving in smaller or you have a smaller participation number. So if you're feeling a little sense of like, oh my gosh, I wish we were going really deep on some of this, there's going to be more opportunities to connect with us. But here's the really quick overview of where you can at least get started. And the thing about the Tapestry of Faith programs of the curricula is that many people say they're too long, there's too much. Get a few partners to review with you if you haven't already, and there's a rich array of resources. They actually do have a curriculum map that is very, very helpful. That took years to create actually for the Tapestry materials. And even if you are just pulling 1 or 2 activities out for if you have one multi-age class, or if you have 3 different classes or 4 or more, and help organize, get people to help you organize that, so you have at least a month in advance of some of that content, or maybe you all have already figured that out. But here's the part that many people haven't done because they're so anxious to get started, so anxious to make sure the teachers know what they're supposed to be doing and all that kind of good stuff. Take a moment to look at the UUA's Tapestry of Faith vision statement. There is a clear articulation, a description of the kind of community that we are hoping to be with one another. It's not a description of this is the measurable content that anyone going through the program should have and to be able to recite back to us. No, it's a description of who we are to be. I really encourage you to look at that. Also, there's lots of rich resources. We're going to be sending you this PowerPoint, so you don't need to make any notes from this. We'll be happy to send it to you. And there is a models of RE there, looking particularly at theme-based programming. And even if you are serving with a minister who's not on board right now with doing a theme-based approach, that doesn't keep you from looking at these rich resources. And when we're talking about themes, we're talking about broad themes: hope, joy, love, courage. It's really worth it to look at some of these models. It's really important to realize we are making sure that at this time in our movement that there is a way that we can be truly inclusive. So taking some time to look at these resources on inclusion, very important. If you happen to be lifespan in your charge of what you were doing in serving your congregation, there are a lot of resources through the uua.org, including these discussion guides. The common reads, some of you all may have done those or will be unaware. This is when one book is lifted up for often 6 to 9 months, and actually many congregations are reading it. My sorrow with this is that often it's only adults, and many of these books are wonderful and great for teens, especially. We did Just Mercy from Brian Stevenson as a common read. Right now, the common read is Justice on Earth, and it's worth looking at. And then the part that really is a source of tremendous information as well as a model that is sustainable is looking at this small group ministry approach. Now, this was designed specifically for youth, but it can work for adolescents. And I think something changes when we actually use the mindset that every class is actually a small group ministry. And Cameron, I've lost track of the numbers, so I'm kind of diving along. So wave if you think that you're supposed to be doing something on a slide that I'm going to charge ahead. Okay. So guess what? So you're in a time of transition from an understanding that we were to organize church schools to now hopefully creating multi-generational learning environments. Well, part of these tectonic plate shifts happen now. This has been 3 years ago, or 2 years ago. A dear colleague of mine, Kim Sweeney, who had served in the New England region, had the Spirit move her and wrote this incredible piece called The Death of Sunday School, which articulated in a very accurate and even statistical way a review of the numbers that RE enrollment over the last decade has radically declined because, again, families are often not looking for another classroom experience for their young people. This is worth reading with your RE committee, your RE council, or just on your own, or looking at it with other RE professionals, or hopefully staff, additional staff members as well. The benediction here, and I'm giving it very short shrift, and it's worth reading it in its entirety. The benediction here is that we have to make sure that families feel like they're partners in our RE program, that they are encouraged to have a sense that often parents are the primary religious educators, and that there are activities for them to be doing at home, which is continuing growing in consciousness as a Unitarian Universalist, both for adults, children, and youth, and that we have to do more as a multi-generational, experiential, values-based community. Those are the two big benediction pieces: more family ministry and more multi-generational, experiential, values-based. That's really, and I didn't do it justice, The Death of Sunday School, but worth looking at.
Can I add to that, Nancy?
Please chime in, dear.
Yeah, so Death of Sunday School, great paper, read it. A few ways that I'll add to summarize it is Sunday School was created at a time when so quote unquote traditional families had one working and one stay-at-home parent, and Sunday school programs were modeled accordingly. Now most families have all working parents, and so the volunteer capacity that we expect for old school Sunday school models is not necessarily sustainable in all churches. So we have to rethink it. Another piece of that is that you use, as you probably know, you use youth retention rate is around 15%. So youth who grow up in the faith stay in the faith at a rate of about 15%, which is astronomically lower than a lot of other denominations. I think it's Lutherans who are up there between 60 to 70% are the best. And so research finds that the single biggest predictor in whether a youth will stay in their church has nothing to do with the program, because as UUs, we're always looking for a shiny new program to save the day. What Kim Sweeney says is the best RE program in the world will not save the day. The best religious educator in the world will not save the day. The single biggest predictor in whether or not a youth will stay in the church is the level of engagement of their parents. So you have to think about yourself as ministering to the parents, and also think about children and families coming to the church only to be separated and to do church apart is problematic, right? It's not to say we have to abolish Sunday school altogether or abolish RE programs, but we have to think about ourselves as ministering to the whole family. How are they doing Unitarian Universalism together? And Unitarian Universalism, our denomination has a history of creating a very radically separate culture for our youth that looks completely different than what the culture of the church is. And so we have to think about how do we reconcile these. And I think Kim Sweeney's paper is going to gives a lot of insight about that.
And these are the conversations to be a part of, and we'll be highlighting ways through social media to be in conversation with other religious educators. And it's an exciting time, actually, and we're really figuring a lot out, and it really has to do with building relationships. But back to some really other good concrete resources, a whole church model, which often is referred to as a theme-based approach. If you sign up for Soul Matters, and again, we'll be sending you this PowerPoint, even if your congregation isn't using the formal or just saying, well, we kind of use theme-based, you can still use much of the content, and there's wonderful, wonderful resources for religious education in the Soul Matters. But it's a way for the whole congregation to be learning one thing on a Sunday with lots of different ways to approach it. And I think this is still me. Cameron, is that right? I think so. So I want to make sure if any of you are new to our vocation, that you understand that we have a professional association, the Liberal Religious Educator Association, which is anti-racist and anti-oppressive, welcoming. And it's so important that you ascribe to it and get involved if you can, or at least join. There are scholarships available for, especially for newer DREs. There often is, not often, but every time, I believe, at a General Assembly, there is a pre-LREDA gathering and a learning opportunity as well as fellowship. And then coming up soon in November, there's a LREDA Fall Conference that'll be wonderful. And there's going to be a link there for you.
LREDA is your primary source for both collegial support and for training. LREDA offers a lot of training, often in conjunction with us, with the UUA. We work very closely together, even though we're not necessarily the same organization. Really recommend joining LREDA. There's a small yearly fee to become a member. And if you do not have professional expenses allotted to join LREDA, I highly recommend advocating to get professional expenses to join LREDA, that your congregation cover your membership, because I think it's going to be one of your most crucial resources to be a member. So going on to the next slide, speaking of advocacy, LREDA has what is called the Good Officer Program. So you're in a congregation, you're in a church, you're in an institution full of human beings, no less Unitarian Universalist human beings. And Unitarian Universalists have opinions. And diverse opinions, pluralism, leads to conflict often. So it's not a question of if conflict will happen, it's when conflict will happen. And that conflict may occur with staff, it may occur with ministers, it may occur with congregants. It is hard to deal with, but again, know that you are not alone. And that's kind of the purpose of Good Officers, is at its foundation, the Good Officer is an advocacy program that helps you know that you're not alone. So at the very least, Good Officers can function as counselors for navigating these conflicts. And they can also provide advocacy if, say, for example, if you're getting paid below what the fair compensation guidelines for the UUA offers, and you wish to advocate to get up to fair compensation, your good officer can help with that. It's often difficult, especially for people with marginalized identities, to be put in a position of advocating for themselves. So a good officer is your companion in doing that. And their motto is call early, call often. And so so I'm in Texas. Kathy Smith was my good officer when I was director of religious education, and she was kind of my lifeline a couple times. So they're there to help. Yep. So moving on, the Renaissance program. So Jess, I'd actually like to hear from Jess, because you said you took 90 hours already in the Renaissance program. That's more than I ever did.
Right.
That's awesome. Like, you have a head start. Jess, do you want to share a little bit about it?
Sure. I jumped in with it at the mountain last summer. Southeast LREDA usually hosts a RenMod for that week, and gained so much. And I'm a researcher and a learner, and I don't know what I'm doing, and so I'm trying to figure out what I'm doing. So I kind of used my own fun money to sign up for every class that I could, and I haven't applied for the credentialing program yet because of the stuff that was happening with my minister leaving, but these are just amazing. They're I think it's $175 ish for one class. It's about 4 to 8 weeks, depending which class. You're with the DREs from all over. Well, everybody has different acronyms, and it just creates a community, and you work together and you bounce ideas. It's really amazing to finally feel like you aren't doing this by yourself. Like, oh, there's other people out here that are having this exact same struggle, so I'm not doing this wrong. And they do a really great job. They've constantly rewriting them and updating them. Most of them are online, so they meet like this in Zoom. And the reading material that they give you is amazing. I have a binder of it that I'm constantly referring to. I've had parents wish they could take these classes because they're like, wait, where did you learn that? I need to learn that.
Well, actually, they are open. A lot of people think they're just for professional religious educators. I would always encourage folks to bring your RE committee chair, or it's open to seminarians. It's open, but they are designed to help. And all of the ones that you see a little star next to, of course, have a little bit more information, and as well as there are some that are online only. The ones with the star are the online modules, which didn't exist a couple decades ago, so these are really wonderful. Sadly, our time is ticking, so we're going to need to kind of surf over a couple of these slides, because I want to at least get us an introduction to some of the youth UU safety stuff. So Cameron, I'm going to kind of go out of order here. So these professional connections, super important. There are great Facebook pages, so important to get plugged in. Somebody mentioned the Southeast LREDA. There's a Facebook page. There's one in Mid-America. It's a way to put your questions out there. Also nationally, there is a Unitarian Universalist Religious Educators page. And so really a great way. And there isn't any question that is dumb. All of them are good. Somebody has mentioned the RE credentialing program. I think it's really wonderful and important. I'm a credentialed religious educator and would be happy to answer questions. The link is here. I would encourage you, if you have just started to really think about that for a while, they do have they want you to have served for some time before you enter the program, but and there is funding to help you with that. So I think I'm going to turn it over. I believe this was going to be you. Let's see where we are, how much more we've got. You want to do these two, Cameron? the creating safer spaces and we're in a time of change?
So for the first time ever, the UUA is releasing comprehensive youth safety guidelines. And we call them guidelines because they are not mandated for churches. Churches are autonomous bodies and so can govern themselves accordingly. But we are giving these and highly suggesting that churches begin the process of adopting these guidelines. So these guidelines don't just prioritize physical safety, but they prioritize emotional safety as well. And at the basis of that emotional safety is trust. So these guidelines aren't just about not setting the building on fire, but for example, making sure you have a space that caters to the mental health, the mental and emotional well-being of trans children. Well, all children, but particularly for children and youth with marginalized identities, because I think if intentional effort is not made towards doing so, they're going to leave. If people don't have a baseline level of physical and emotional safety as well as trust, they're not going to come. Your youth aren't going to come. If they're forced to, they're not going to stick around. They're going to withdraw either physically or emotionally or both. So these guidelines are comprehensive, and they are a really good resource in how to develop that kind of universal trust in your program. These are not, we have not fully implemented these guidelines. We are actually beta testing it for about a year, trying to solicit as much feedback as possible from DREs and from religious educators. So I recommend looking through these and identifying any areas that you might see as challenging or problematic, and sending us your feedback. So we're beta, like I said, we're beta testing for a year, and then we're aiming for full-scale implementation in the fall of 2020. If they are UUA, if they are intentional UUA events, these are the guidelines we're going to be using. And if your congregation wants to host an event in partnership with a UUA, then they will need to be in compliance with these guidelines. But like I said, beyond that, there's still just things we strongly suggest. I think I heard not too long ago, oh, the UUA is making us take on these guidelines. And again, that we're not a Catholic diocese, so we can't mandate them.
No.
But they're good, and I suggest taking a strong look at it and considering them.
And a lot of thought has been put into them, you all. This has been almost a 2.5, 3-year process. And Cameron and I are committed to having a series of conversations. If your cluster or your LREDA chapter, like Jess, you mentioned you're plugged into the Southeast LREDA chapter, we would love to virtually just have a conversation with you all. Not that we're there to present it so you get it lock, stock, and barrel. We want to hear the feedback. It would be helpful if folks reviewed some of this. We will be having an open session to anyone on October 11th, which is a Friday. It is a daytime webinar about specifically the youth guidelines as well as the changing landscape in youth ministry. That is posted right now on the Mid-America site, but when I send out a copy of this PowerPoint to all of you all, even if you're from Massachusetts or Jersey or wherever you're from, we would welcome you to take part in any of the things that we are holding. And I know, like Sarah Cannon in the Heartland area, I also pitched a possible date to have a conversation Really quickly, some of the sort of balcony things that we're really hoping that you look for or hold on to is that no matter what you're doing in terms of making sure that you are a safer congregation for all vulnerable, not just children, youth, but also adults, we want to make sure that you understand there are things like when you are communicating with youth in social media, you are to be making sure that that message has another adult on it. That's one example of this sort of shift change in thinking. There's a lot in there, goodness on gender identity. And actually, I think even AL facilitators, Cameron, should be looking at these guidelines, and DREs working with those AL facilitators. So you're in a time of exciting change. I just want to name, because I want to make sure everybody has time to ask questions. I think we're right before the question page. So I hurried us up maybe a little bit too much, but guess what? I've said it now 4 times. You can count it out. You're in an exciting time in our movement. We are going through a deep consciousness changing really since 2017, and understanding that we have to dismantle oppression, dismantle white supremacy, and oppression in all forms, for especially those with marginalized identities in our movement. Folks, if you heard just a little bit about it, or if you heard a lot about it, this isn't going anywhere. This is a deep river running through our movement that, as Cameron and I and other leaders from the UU are going to make sure that we are paying very thoughtful, sensitive attention to in everything that we do. It means that as you're having a teacher session, I went down to Asheville, North Carolina, and specifically talked about this with their teachers who were just starting the year, because they really need to be thinking about ways to make sure that they're not creating a classroom that really does lean into those characteristics of a white supremacy culture. We don't have time to go through all of them tonight, but making sure that there's conversations happening. If a cluster of religious educators want to have a conversation with us, we would be happy to meet with you, to talk about inclusivity, to talk about trans inclusion, to talk about dismantling white supremacy. This is the heart of the matter in terms of building healthy multi-generational communities. So we're trying to demonstrate sensitivity about the ways also people learn. This is a time to be sensitive to neurodiversity. For those of you all know that in February, Sally Patton, who wrote, really considered to be an important resource in welcoming children with special needs, she'll be coming out of retirement to meet with LREDA leaders, and actually at a retreat up in Racine, Wisconsin, February 6th, 7th, and 8th. I'll include that information when I send out the email to everyone. So there'll be ways to actually talk more about neurodiversity, as well as we have archived resources and webinars on neurodiversity. So let's pledge tonight that we are an ongoing learning community. We are here to help one another. I learn as much from new religious educators as I do from those who have been serving forever. So let's open it up now, Cameron, to questions. We've got about 8 to 9 minutes. Anybody?
All right. I guess I'll.
Please.
One of the things is, like, I understand we're supposed to make, the vulnerable communities feel safe and welcoming and stuff. And, I understand the importance of that, especially being a parent of a trans child. But how, at the same time, do we make sure that the cisgender and them don't get made to feel alienated? You know what I'm saying? I mean, how do we work the balancing act to make sure that everybody feels included without accidentally making somebody feel lesser in the process of trying to, be all inclusive?
That's such a great question. Was that Scott? Was that Scott asking?
Yes.
Oh, great, Scott. Thank you so much. I don't think there's one easy answer. To me, the piece that's missing when we try to build our consciousness is making sure that we're in a spiritual practice with one another, because I think that we find a unity in worshiping together and making sure that we have creative expressions of how important this community is to us. So I think there's lots of different avenues. Cameron, do you have any thoughts on this?
I would say, and we can, if you need resources on this, feel free to reach out. But I would say do some research on the impacts of marginalization, and know that, for example, like white, cisgender, heterosexual, like that's still part of the dominant culture in Unitarian Universalism. So it's going to be really hard to really alienate folks in that culture. There is going to be an element of fragility. So I would identify the difference between fragility and alienation. Because being part of the dominant culture, so for example, dismantling white supremacy, systemic white supremacy, our decision to center that in our movement comes in large part because of a half century of people of color actually feeling isolated or alienated within Unitarian Universalism. And because we are choosing to center that, people within the dominant culture, particularly white UUs, and I include myself among that, may push back against that because at first it may feel like alienation. But really, when you're still part of the dominant culture, I don't think you can be marginalized or alienated in that regard. I would challenge us to create atmospheres that, knowing that part of dismantling oppression means people in the dominant culture will feel uncomfortable. So we need to, I think we need to educate and cultivate an environment to where our children, our youth, our adults can learn about that discomfort and become aware of that discomfort and try to work through that discomfort. And sometimes that may feel or look like alienation, but I would say I'd be hesitant to call it alienation.
Mm-hmm. When we look at a covenant-centered approach to a congregational embodiment as a learning community that is seeking to spread more hope, love, joy, courage, justice in the world, I think it's essential to name that we are countercultural. We are seeking to create a beloved community where we learn from one another, where we make sure that we are centering voices that in every other aspect of their lives, they are discounted, they are treated differently. Our center of our covenant are our principles. And when we lift up justice, equity, and compassion in human relationships, but yet our congregational structure, the way that we organize our programs are all modeling this dominant culture, which says we have to make sure we're getting lots of measurable content. We have to be experts. We have to make sure that we're getting in there and getting out on time. We have to, all those characteristics, and there's so many more. So this is a time of deep change, but we are change agents. We are choosing a unique endeavor and a unique expression of how to be humane human beings on this planet and to help other people grow. So anybody else have a question or two in our last couple of minutes? I realize that's almost impossible, 2 questions in 2 minutes. How about another question before we begin closing? Or comment, either one. Okay. So for those of you who came tonight hoping to get concrete resources, don't forget those slides. There is a lot out there. Don't forget you have thought partners, and Cameron and I truly will respond in a timely fashion. If you just say, yikes, I don't know how to wade through this, I don't know where to go in this regard. Remember the upcoming webinars, especially for those who are organizing smaller programs, and especially around the guidelines, the UUA's guidelines. I just want to thank each of you all for listening to whatever that heart song was, to move forward in your life, to respond to the needs, not just of our congregation, of the greater world, where we are creating beautiful communities, which hopefully will carry out messages that there is a better way for us to be on this planet with one another. Cameron, do you have any closing thoughts before we end?
No, only thank you for joining us, and Godspeed, or Spirit of Life speed. And reach out. Feel free to reach out if you need any kind of support along the way. We are here for that. So thank you.
Yes. So I'm going to close the room now, but know that again, we'll be sending you the PowerPoint, the list of resources. You'll have everybody's email address. Let's consider ourselves a learning community. So many blessings, and hope to stay in community with you all. Good night.
Good night. And this is Amy. I just want to say, sorry, my connection died right at the end. So thank you for finishing up.
Not to worry. Thanks, Amy. Bye, everybody.
Bye.